Hi, this is Maxim Verbist. I'm a clinical psychologist. The 56 minor arcana of the tarot concentrate all the knowledge that modern psychology has discovered about the human mind. Therefore, you can use them as if you would seek advice from a psychologist. The best way we can represent how the four elements were conceived operating what we call nowadays the mind is the metaphor of the inkjet printer. The mind works just like a printer. Its job is to render us the best picture of the reality possible, and to make a good picture we will need four main colors. The black ink would represent the element earth, which in tarot is represented by the suit of denier. And with that ink we can represent all the part of reality that concern our physical needs, our necessity to survive, for comfort, everything we need to feel relatively secure in our environment, experienced as a physical environment. Then we have the second ink, the magenta, which represents the emotional consciousness, the element water, and in the tarot, the suit of cups. And with that color, we will be able to represent all the emotional and attachment issue of life. What are the important bonds we have with people, with groups, with places, with ideologies? The third ink, the cyan, would represent the intellectual part of existence. And in the tarot, it will be represented by the suit of swords. With the intellect, we can take distance with the world and understand the underlying abstraction that are responsible for what we observe in the exterior. And the last ink, the yellow, would represent the element fire. In tarot, the suit of wands. And in our psychology, they represent the element of desire, that force that goes from basic instinct to pure creativity, that allows us to modify our environment according to our personality. And to have a good picture of the world, we need the four elements. And of course, we can concentrate in one of the four and just see the reality with one of the four inks. But that picture will be heavily distorted, because to apprehend properly the existence, we need the four inks. We need that to make a proper picture. Along with the doctrine of the four elements comes also the idea that every personality tends to specialize into a temperament. And nowadays we still use those words of antique psychology. We have the phlegmatic, who is dominated by the element earth, and which is mostly concerned by chair and table problems, very concrete and not very emotional. What matters for him is stability. Then we have the melancholic, which is dominated by the element water, and which will be highly concerned by emotional issue and also the possibility of losing people he loves, therefore its tendency for sadness. Then we have the bilious temperament, which is dominated by the element air, and which is which tends to be very worried about anything and will quarrel to fight for his opinions. And the last is the sanguine temperament, which is dominated by the element fire, and which is mostly optimistic and interested to change the world around him. As such, having a temperament is a great thing, because it allows us to go much deeper in one of the elements and get specialized into it. But there is also a downside of having a temperament, because our temperament will push us to react using one of the 4 elements. But the problem, if we do so, we tend also to neglect the 3 others and approach life just with the element which we have strong, and lose sight, neglect, sometimes completely deny the 3 others. So the more we get specialized in one of the 4 elements, the more we are at risk to overlook the 3 others and create all sorts of problems, because life is much more complex and we cannot afford to see it just with 1/4 of the capacity of our mind. Modern psychology do not pay attention to the theory of the 4 elements. By contrast, a lot of emphasis was given to study and to understand how the mind is growing. So if we apply the theory of the 4 elements to what we call developmental psychology, we can approach the minor arcana and the suit that comes from the ace to the queen as a story that explains us how the 4 dimensions of the mind evolve from the rock bottom basis of the ace to its higher achievement represented by the queen. Let's have a look on that. Every suit of the tarot is divided in 14 arcana, and we can study those 14 arcana as a 2-fold process. From the ace to the 7, the suits describe the growth towards the level of an average adult. The first, the ace, represents the pure potentiality that is driving the entire growth process. The 2 represents the first occurrence of the element in the mind in a very instinctive form and preconscious. Then the 3, which is the first conscious representation of that element. In the 4th, that is acquired in the middle of the childhood, the element gets some structure to mature. In the 5, it can render the first socially visible manifestation in the life, and it corresponds to the late infancy. Then in the 6th, that very element is restructured during the teenage to grow and to get much more personal. And when we arrive to the 7th, the element arrives at the level of maturity that is expected from an average adult. The second part of the suit will represent stages of development that not every adult will take, because they require special circumstances, and most of all, they require a much more self-conscious approach of life to achieve them. So with the 8, the element acquire an outstanding level of functioning that will make people's performance slightly superior than what is expected from the average adult. Then, at the level of the 9, that element start to hit its own limitation, and it start to get complicated, and we start to realize the limitation of the element. In the number 10, we arrive to a complete dead end. Not because that element is wrong, it's just because that element will allow us to go till a certain level, and beyond a certain level is just a limitation of the mind. And we get aware of that. That may be painful, but it's part of the growth. Then we have the 4 character that represents how the element blend one with each other. The page will represent the element blend with the element air. And at this level, we get capable to articulate verbally and mentally what is about that element. And we gain a clear mental consciousness of this element. Then we have the night, which will add the element fire to the element of the suit. And at this point, it will give a tremendous force to achieve great goals, but also an element of fanatism into that element. Then we have the king, which will add the stability of the element earth. And it can create great achievement and great stability. And then the last level of that mastery of the element is represented by the queen. And the queen really is the only arcana that is somehow beyond that element, and that will allow us to get away from the trap of the mind and to achieve the soul dimension that is hidden behind the element. So the queen is the only character that can really heal us from that element. So with the 14 steps of every 4 elements, we have a complete mapping of the developmental psychology in the 4 aspects. And this will allow us to understand, in front of a difficult situation, which part of our mind got stuck, and how to reorient the strength of that element to achieve some element of healing. So in that sense, the more we understand that, and the more we are capable to heal the mind from the many limitations it has been programmed with. Obviously, a tarot deck will never replace a real-life psychologist. But why do we need a psychologist to face our problem? We use our mind to make sense of reality and to try to adapt. But when the problem is in the mind itself, usually the mind really struggles to understand the mind because we get caught in a loophole. The mind cannot heal the mind. That's why we need an external point of view that helps us to see what's wrong with our reasoning. And that is exactly what the tarot is about. It is 56 pictures that will help us to understand what goes wrong with our mind. And in that sense, it really serves as a pocket psychologist.